and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride, and I'm joined today by two excellent guests. Firstly, by the SNP candidate for the Dumbarton constituency in May's election, Toni Guigliano. Toni, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Kenny. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's good to have you. And on the other side, we have historian, feminist activist, and committee member of Women for Independence, Lesley Orr. Lesley, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thanks, Kenny. Nice to be here.
Well, it's great to have both of you here, and we've got plenty to talk about. But we start, as we always do, with a quick update on coronavirus statistics. So these numbers are as of 2 p.m. yesterday. Today's numbers, obviously, will be published at 2 o'clock today. So as of 2 p.m. yesterday, there were 1,307 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland. And sadly, there were 76 new reported deaths. Since the start of the pandemic, a total of 1,526,985 people in Scotland have been tested. Of those, 1,355,979 were confirmed negative, and 171,006 were confirmed positive. On Friday night, there were 2,085 people in hospital, and 159 of those were in intensive care. That takes the total of people who have died in Scotland from the coronavirus to 5,704. Now, that's the what we call the daily count. That's people who have died in hospital having received a positive test. And we also can tell you that 380,667 people in Scotland have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, and 5,188 have received their second dose. And to start off today's show, we wanted to talk just a wee bit about COVID because, especially in the last week or so, there has been a lot of discussion about Scotland's vaccination rate. There have been a number of attacks on the Scottish Government about not keeping up with England and the rest of the UK. So, Lesley, I thought I would come to you first on this. The Scottish Government has decided to follow what the JCVI has suggested and do vaccinations of people in care homes first, which obviously is a slightly more difficult, time-consuming process to get out to, especially to some of the outlying areas with the vaccine to take into care homes versus what's happened in England, where there have been large vaccination centres opened and people are just going in and getting done relatively rapidly. I wonder what you make of the way that the opposition parties in Scotland have seized on these relatively slight differences in numbers to attack the Scottish Government over their vaccination strategy.
Well, the first thing I would say, Kenny, is that I think it makes very good sense that the government has decided to concentrate on care homes just now, especially given the amount of, the row that there was and the concerns that there have been about care home deaths and incidences of the virus running through care homes. So I think that's a good strategy to have adopted. As for the way in which other parties are making mileage of that, well, that is also entirely predictable because everything, I think, actually, inevitably and unavoidably, everything is really seen through the prism of the constitutional issue, and that means, and because COVID clearly is absolutely the major way in which people are assessing and looking at what the governments here and in the UK are doing. That's the basis for comparison that people are making. So it doesn't surprise me at all that these point, when you listen to it, of course there has to be constructive criticism, or at least awareness of what's going on, and not just accepting what different governments are choosing to do wholesale, but looking from an evidence-based point of view at what the approach is and what the rationale for that is. But honestly, it does get a bit tiresome, the constant kind of picky way in which both the media and other parties often approach these questions, which doesn't really take seriously or doesn't, it really becomes a kind of political football rather than really attending to the absolutely fundamental issues here. In some respects, I find it more disturbing, that public health and other experts are also accused of politicising this issue when, it's absolutely vital that we're paying heed to experts and taking their advice where it's given.
And Toni, Lesley mentioned the media there. The BBC has come under a bit of fire from all sides over its continued coverage of the First Minister's daily briefings. But we've now seen them add on this kind of political element afterwards where opposition politicians get to question the issue and comment on what the First Minister is saying. I wonder what you make of that, and might it be better perhaps to get some public health experts on at that point to give some objective commentary and analysis of what the First Minister is saying, what the government's doing, rather than just making it a free hit for Douglas Ross or whoever else?
Well, that's right, Kenny, and I agree with Lesley's analysis. Actually, I mean, I've been saying from the outset that we need to try to depoliticise this as much as possible from the perspective of boosting confidence in the vaccine rollout. So we should all be getting behind the vaccine rollout. The opposition should be getting behind it. The media should be getting behind it. And this kind of gotcha style reporting that we're seeing from some quarters in the press is quite frankly anti-Scotland, because we need to succeed. We want the vaccine rollout to succeed, and I'm sure that all the media outlets do too. But this constant, comparison, with England, I think, frankly, is unhelpful. I mean, we're going to see that in the constitutional debate, but I would like to see more experts, taking a lead on this, because ultimately, increasing public confidence in the vaccine rollout is key. We have an anti-vax movement in Europe, in different countries in Europe, that is alive and well. And that's an issue in itself. So, for governments like the UK to start, branding this as the UK is the best country in the world for getting the vaccine out, before anybody else. These are comments that are actually counterproductive in boosting confidence, because people have questions, and there are people out there with very legitimate questions. And I think it's important for governments to be led by the science, for the opposition to be responsible and getting behind, the efforts of not only our public servants but our doctors and nurses. Everybody here is trying to do the best for Scotland. There's nobody that's trying to work against, in our public service, and everybody is trying to get the best result for Scotland. And I think it's important that we all play as one team. So opposition, government. That doesn't mean to say that there shouldn't be scrutiny. Of course there needs to be scrutiny, but the way that we go about things is important as well. I mean, you talked about the First Minister's briefings. I mean, my opponent in Dumbarton actually lobbied the BBC against the First Minister's briefings, because they felt that it was too political. In actual fact, it's public health information that needs to be communicated to the electorate. People need to know what the latest guidance is. People want to know what they're able to do, and what they shouldn't be doing. So, this doesn't help. It's not helpful to the communities that we seek to represent, and it doesn't do anybody any favours. So that kind of calls into judgment, really, politicians who, quite frankly, have so much hatred for the SNP that they are willing to put those political beliefs before the public health interests of their constituents, and that raises big question marks there.
Well, COVID obviously has been dominating the headlines for over 9 months now, but the other big story that's been dominating the headlines for even longer is Brexit. And as we know, Brexit has caused a lot of problems, particularly for exporters. This week we saw Scottish seafood producers protesting down in London. But we've also seen Ireland bypassing the UK, goods that used to come from Ireland through the UK to then go on through Dover and onto the continent, are now bypassing the UK. Brexit has caused Ireland to develop these new ferry routes. So, Tony, I think I'll come to you first on this. These seafood exporters, they've been offered £23 million in compensation by the UK government. But we've heard reports that there are losses of over £1 million a day. £23 million literally wouldn't cover all the losses that they've seen up to today. Do you think the UK government is just not, or is it more that they perhaps don't?
The UK government should follow the lead of the European Commission and provide a lifeline to mitigate the impacts of Brexit to small businesses, to businesses right across Scotland. If you look at the EU members were given a share of 5 billion to mitigate Brexit. What's the equivalent from the UK government? There are constituents in. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Sorry,
we can hear you fine.
I'm getting some feedback. If you look at the fishing industry in Argyll, for example, the fishermen have spoken up about their difficulties in getting their produce to Europe because of the red tape, because of the paperwork, because of the extra unforeseen costs. Small businesses are really struggling with this. Our fishing industry is on its knees. And the reality is that the UK government has spent the past few years telling us that we would have the easiest transition, that none of these issues would arise, and that everything would be hunky-dory. That's not the reality. The reality of Brexit is that small businesses are struggling, our fishing industry is struggling, and we need to put more measures in place, more support in place to ensure that people get the support they need. Now, of course, Ireland have 3 routes to the continent, I believe operated by 4 different ferry companies, and I understand that there are more routes to come, and it makes sense. Ireland, the EU is Ireland's largest market, so of course they want to bypass the Brexit shambles that they're seeing in the UK. And I want to see a situation in Scotland where we are able to boost our exports directly with the European Union, and boost that. Obviously, through independence, we'll be able to do that, and we're limited to what we can do right now.
Mm. And when we look, Lesley, at this situation with these seafood exporters, it does seem like these markets might become just completely closed off to them because they've not been able to export as much, if anything, in some cases, throughout January so far. And importers, particularly France, Spain, the people that buy Scottish langoustines and other seafood, have started looking elsewhere. I mean, is this likely to be the end for the fishing industry in Scotland? Lesley? Oh,
Well,
we seem to have lost Lesley just now. So yeah, I'll come back to Tony then. Yeah, Tony, the same question. I mean, is this something that you think the fishing industry in Scotland can recover from?
Well, it's incredibly difficult, and we've heard, directly. I mean, just outside the constituency that I'm standing in Tarbert, fishermen who are saying very clearly that if this goes on another week, another 2 weeks, then that's the end of their business. So they've been very clear to the UK government that they can't make ends meet, that they can't get their produce to Europe on time. In fact, I believe that this particular business in Tarbet was talking about the first time in 9 years that they were unable to get their produce to the continent, as a result of Brexit. So, Scotland's been ripped out of the EU against its will. We have a shambolic situation. whereby the fishing industry was promised. Actually, it was one of the few industries that the UK government prioritised in the campaign. When it said, we will have independent fishing waters and our fishing industries will thrive through Brexit. The exact opposite has happened. And we've heard from Peterhead, from right across Scotland, the fishing industry spokespeople saying very clearly that this has been a complete disaster. And if it goes on any further, then it will have significant consequences for the industry in the future. So we need to make sure that the UK government compensates as much as possible and ensures the viability of our industry.
Lesley, do we have you back now? Not yet. Okay. Well, we will move on just now then, because the other big story. Oh, we do have Lesley back now. Lesley, how are you doing?
Sorry about that.
No problem. We were just talking about the fishing industry, and Toni pointed out that the fishing industry was one of the industries that had been most supportive of Brexit in a lot of ways, and one that the UK government had kind of relied on as an argument for Brexit. But we've now seen, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation and various other fishing bodies saying that this is a betrayal, that the UK government doesn't care about fishing. What do you make of the kind of political impact of that in terms of that sense of betrayal that's being felt around the coastal communities of Britain?
Well, betrayal is a very good word for what's happened, because the Brexit campaign really courted the fishing industry above all others, and said that all their disadvantages or supposed disadvantages from the common fisheries policy, that we would be taking back control and it would all be fine. And since then, what's happened? The negotiations were appalling. The fisheries minister didn't even read the detail of the deal. This kind of shambles, the incompetence. No wonder they have this sense that they've been betrayed and that the government doesn't care. It seems a very, just at the level of political competence, it's pretty appalling, actually. And what will be the political fallout? It'll be interesting. I was looking at the Twitter feed of the Loch Fyne Seafoods. Their director is somebody who's been very vocal in recent days about the devastation that's going to be caused to the seafood and fishing industry. And
sorry, go on, Lesley. Sorry.
Yeah. And some of it seems that some boats are now going directly to Denmark to land their catch, which is going to have a really bad knock-on effect on the fish processing industry. Peterhead, so it's down both sides of Scotland's coast, the seafood and the white fish industry. Who knows what will happen, whether the people in those industries who believed what they were told about the advantages of Brexit and are now reaping a very bitter harvest of that, is that going to affect their political affiliations or their sense of where they should direct their political sport in the future? It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, well, no doubt we will see some evidence about that come May when the Scottish election comes around. But we move on now to one of the big stories in global news. On Wednesday, we saw Joe Biden inaugurated as the 46th President of the United States, and Kamala Harris inaugurated as his Vice President. And I think, Lesley, I'll come to you first, because Kamala Harris, she's the first woman ever in one of these top two jobs in the executive branch in the US. She's only the second black person to be in one of those roles. She's also the first person of South Asian descent to achieve that kind of high office. I wonder, what do you think the impact of that is on not just women in America, but people around the world seeing a woman in that kind of high profile role?
Well, it's been a long time coming, hasn't it?
Hmm.
But thank goodness we have now seen that day. So it's no surprise that so many women and people of colour, not just in the United States, were really quite moved at that moment when she took the oath given by what's her name, Sotomayor,
Yeah.
the member of the Supreme Court who is a Latino. All of these things are really important signs, and given what we've just come out of in the United States, all the more significant and important. These things are symbolic. That she's obviously a very able woman. It'll be interesting to see how she fulfills her role as vice president. Politically, there are things that I'm sure I would disagree with her about, but it's really important, really significant, and especially given on the issue of the way in which racism and white superiority and white supremacy in all its vicious, hostile nastiness has been laid bare in recent months and years in America. It's all the more important, really, that she becomes a beacon and others with her. Actually, thinking about Amanda Foreman, the youth poet laureate who read her wonderful 5 minute poem at the inauguration. These things are really important, really significant, but there does need to be more than just a symbolic change. This needs to go right down to the heart of not just political life in America, but the whole kind of culture and understanding of itself as a democracy, as a multicultural, multiracial country. Because, really fundamentally what we've seen is that the so-called city on a hill has been founded from the beginning on a very sadly a lot of racism. It's built into the constitutional understanding of America, and the fact that there are still 70, 80 million people in the United States who continue to support the Trump cult and continue to want to exert their claimed superiority, or these
Mm.
are there are fundamental issues here that are going to take a lot of tackling, and it's not just Kamala Harris. There are other members of the Senate and the House of Representatives who are going to have a key role here, but it really goes right down to the streets and to the policing of the United States. So there are huge issues here to tackle. But on the women's issue, yeah, absolutely, this is so important in a world where, you know, a tiny minority of world leaders are women. But as we've seen during the pandemic, many of them are the ones who are actually relatively successful in tackling and addressing the issues, these really difficult, fundamental human and health issues. They bring a different kind of approach to bear. So let's hope we see a bit more of that in the United States in the years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Tony, if I could come to you now, we do talk about reactionary politics in the sense that when there's some sort of progress, the right tends to react and go kind of retrench even more. I wonder how much you think that's likely to happen with, as Lesley says, this substantial chunk of the American population that still supports Trump even after everything we've seen in the last few weeks and the last few years. Do you expect there to be a kind of explosion of extreme right wing activity now in response to the fact that Biden and Harris have taken these powerful jobs?
Well, I think what's clear is that American politics is more polarized than ever. And I think that Joe Biden has a huge job in his hands, and Kamala Harris a huge job in her hands to heal America, to bring people together. I think that can be done. I think the past 4 years have been a bit of a nightmare scenario for the whole world, not just for America. And whilst those 4 years are over with regards to Donald Trump being in the White House, unfortunately, I fear that they are not over. Because what he has done over the past 4 years is create a movement, a real resentment towards what he would describe as the establishment. And therefore, with his constant threats of creating a new party, for example, I think what we have is a growing movement against democracy and against democratic institutions. And so I think there are some real dangers there that this movement will continue. I don't think that it's the end of the story just because Donald Trump has left the building. I think that there are serious repercussions of his 4 year term that will extend well into the future. So there's a real task to bring people together, to evolve into a politics whereby it's okay for people to disagree with each other. We can have disagreements and we can still respect one another, and that's, I think, what Joe Biden was trying to communicate during his inauguration speech. That yes, we will, even in this country, even in Scotland, even in the UK, we will have disagreements constitutionally, but we can still respect one another. We can still respect each other's points of views, and that goes for social media, and that goes for election campaigns, and how we campaign. And I think it's relevant for us. We shouldn't be seeing this as it's an American problem. It's relevant for us as a society, as a democracy, and with regards to the way that we choose to campaign, and also ahead of our own independence referendum, which is imminent and which will be happening, in the near future. So, getting across the fact that we need to be respectful of each other's views, and that is okay, that we can have differences in politics, but that doesn't mean that we go to the lengths of what we've seen in the United States, where you have a complete disregard for law and order, where you have a complete disregard for the Constitution, where you have a complete disregard for democracy. And people like Donald Trump deliberately incited that hatred, and that disregard for democracy, and he must ultimately be held responsible. So there are other question marks there about what will happen to him, legally, with regards to impeachments and so forth. But I think there are lessons to be learned for us going forward as a country. We shouldn't be taking it for granted that it's not our problem, or it's someone else's issue. Misinformation campaigns, for example, a misinformation campaign that we saw in 2016 between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, that was huge. We saw the repercussions of that through a Donald Trump victory, what it meant with Russia's involvement. We know that it's happening here. We know that it's happening in Europe. We know that it's happening in the UK. It's happening in Scotland. And I think we need to be aware of that.
Well, we move on now to another big story in international politics, and one that perhaps hasn't had the attention that it should have had. On Friday, the Treaty on the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons, the Treaty on the Prohibition, of Nuclear Weapons, came into force. The 50th state to ratify it was Honduras. Jamaica and Nauru had also just ratified it. 50 states need to ratify this thing. 122 had approved the treaty at the General Assembly of the United Nations. But once 50 states had actually signed it, ratified it in their own legislatures, it comes into force. Now, Of course, this doesn't apply to the US, the UK, Russia, China, and France, the five biggest and most heavily armed countries in the world. Uh, but it does start to, I think, apply some pressure to those countries. Uh, Lesley, let me come to you first on this. What difference do you think this will make in the world when 50 countries, albeit not the biggest or most powerful countries, have signed up to this? What moral force does that apply to countries like the UK in terms of their nuclear arsenals?
Honestly, I find that quite a difficult question to answer, Kenny. Um, I think it's a hugely significant moment. You know, I have throughout my life I've been involved and active in anti-nuclear campaigns, and much more so have many of my friends and people that I grew up with. Uh, you know, this has been a big issue for women, and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which has had a century of campaigning from the perspective of women's lives and opportunities and where we are positioned politically. You know, that movement has been at the forefront of this campaign. Um, in fact, Women for Independence recently signed the Scottish Women's Covenant in support of the Prohibition Treaty. And I'm certainly very encouraged that Nicola Sturgeon has done likewise, because this, you know, it's a gendered issue. Um, women's lives and well-being and their reproductive capacities are all under serious threat, as of course we all are, uh, by the obscenity of nuclear weapons. I remember years ago I was in Canada at an event, and uh, one of the most absolutely moving and searing experiences that I had there was listening to a woman from the Marshall Islands, you know, where they conducted the nuclear tests in the 1950s, the Bikini Atoll and places like that. And since those tests, you know, the what's happened, you know, just she described the jellyfish babies that have
Mm.
been being born, you know, subsequent to that, and just the appalling effects on individual women and children. And this, you know, it just kind of brings it down to an absolutely, you know, this is destructive at such a fundamental level of what it means to be human, apart from all the threats that it represents. I think the campaign, the international campaign for abolition of nuclear weapons in support of this treaty has been a very significant and very effective movement. And it's really kind of raised the profile and kind of regenerated the kind of grassroots anti-nuclear movement around the world. And all of these things need to be taken account of. Um, you know, Donald Trump in the last weeks of his presidency was still actively lobbying countries not to ratify this treaty. You know, and I see no danger that Joe Biden is going to take a different approach, or indeed any of the nine nuclear powers. And you know, other treaties have fallen. You know, their time has kind of passed, and uh, so there's we're in a very dangerous situation. I was reading David Pratt's article in the National this morning, in which he starts by saying, you know, that we're now 100 seconds to midnight in the, you know, in the on the doomsday clock,
Mm.
because of, you know, we're in a very dangerous position with regard to nuclear weapons at the moment. We're, of course, the pandemic is our concern, but proliferation and our lack of attention, serious action on climate change, and all the disinformation that is such a political issue anyway, all of these factors are creating really a very, very dangerous situation. So this is a vital bit of, you know, this prohibition is really vital. And those countries that have signed it, and those of us who live in countries that haven't signed it but wish we could, We really have to step up and take this seriously and campaign. And, of course, this is one of the factors in the independence debate. And this is obviously a big issue for Toni, in whose the constituency in which he's standing is Faslane and Coalport and that whole awful, awful industry. So I'm not really answering your question about the moral persuasion of the treaty on the nuclear powers, or on NATO indeed, but really those of us who realise and see that this is a key issue for us, for the survival of the human race, we really need to be stepping up our action. I think this is one of the great. It's a fundamental issue for the independence debate, because whatever else happens in this world that we live in our wee bit of it, we have to stop these ghastly weapons of death.
Yeah. Well, Toni, as Lesley says, this hits a wee bit closer to home for you. The Faslane base would be in your constituency if you do win at the election in May. The current MSP there has been an ardent supporter of nuclear weapons, mostly, it seems, because they provide jobs in the area. I wonder what you make of that kind of argument in favour of Faslane and Coalport, and what your position would be as an MSP for the area.
Yes, well, according to Jackie Baillie, it provides 2 million jobs, or 3 million, or 4 million, or whatever it is. It changes every year or so. I mean, her position is untenable. I mean, fundamentally, there will be different issues that we agree with, that Jackie Baillie and I will agree with. There will be major policy issues that we disagree with, and this is one of them. Constitutionally, obviously, we disagree on Trident. We fundamentally disagree with the vision for Faslane in the constituency. Her vision is of nuclear weapons on the Clyde. That's it. That's her vision. Nuclear weapons on the Clyde perennially. My vision is of a Faslane that thrives without nuclear weapons, and I think that it is absolutely capable of doing that as the tri-service of an independent Scotland, as our naval base. I want to repurpose Faslane. I want to repurpose the Clyde estuary, and we would be able to do a lot more with the Clyde estuary if we didn't have nuclear weapons. We don't need to have nuclear weapons to have a thriving naval base. We just need to look at countries anywhere else in the European Union. So this false narrative that we can only provide jobs if we have nuclear weapons in Faslane is an utter nonsense. Faslane will thrive as a non-nuclear naval base. It will thrive as the Army headquarters of an independent Scotland. I will argue, of course, that we should have Ministry of Defence civil service jobs decentralised and based in the constituency. I would want to see an educational institute, for example, in partnership with a Scottish university that can attract the industry talent. It would be a real magnet for industry talent. And this is the point, we have, there are civil service jobs, and I think they should be based in the constituency, but there are defence industry jobs with real talent that I think could be repurposed in different ways in different parts of the Clyde. And I think that we need to have that discussion. I think jobs can be retained. So that's my message to the people of the constituency, people who work at the base, is the SNP has never advocated for closing the base. And this is one of the things that Labour will, with their usual scaremongering tactics, talk about in the upcoming election. We have never talked about closing the base. The base will thrive. It just won't have nuclear weapons in it. And that's the fundamental difference between Jackie Baillie and I. I think we need someone who can really talk about a new vision for Faslane, a new vision for jobs in the area. It is full of potential. The false narrative that we hear from the unionist parties is an utter nonsense, particularly if you consider the fact that, they talk a good game when it comes to, jobs and the army, but, if you consider that they have completely removed, any trace of the army from large parts of Scotland, then those commitments come into question. They also promised, if you remember, in 2014, that there would be 12,500 armed forces personnel based in Scotland by 2020. That commitment is on course to be missed by around 25%. So, the commitment for our armed forces, the commitment for defence is simply not there. And the final point, Kenny, that I would make on this is that it's not just about the immorality, and I completely agree with everything that's been said around the immorality of nuclear weapons, but it's also about the fact that they are yesterday's weapons. They don't fit in with the modern day threats, the hybrid security, the hybrid defence strategies that we need to put in place for today's modern world. They are yesterday's weapons. And if you consider modern security threats, pandemics are security threats. Misinformation that target and undermine our democracy, security threats. There's nothing that Trident can do about those. And there's a lot of other examples around, what we need to do to become a more resilient country, a more resilient Scotland from a defence and strategic perspective. And I'm afraid that Trident isn't part of that picture. So instead of wasting £200 billion on weapons that will never be used, we could be investing money on conventional defence, as I've talked about, or indeed our public services.
Well, as always, we would just like to mention
about this.
Sorry, go on, Lesley.
Yeah, just a kind of personal addition to what Tony's been saying. My father-in-law, who was a skilled engineer living in the Vale of Leven, worked in the car industry for some of his working life, and then when that industry, was decimated, and there were no other jobs for him in that area, he ended up, working at Coolport. It was not by choice. He fundamentally was opposed to the weapons that he was going there every day to maintain. And, like many of his colleagues in that area and in that industry, the last thing they wanted to do was to be working on weapons of mass destruction. And, while I hear what Tony's saying about conventional weaponry and so on, personally, I really think there's a scope here, and it would be important to look at other alternatives, other kinds of industry and employment that could repurpose the skills of those who work in that industry and those who support the people who work there. So I think there are big questions here that we don't really have time to address today, but about security and what we mean by security and what kind of Scotland we're wanting to create and sustain, and what kind of jobs are the ones that really, sustain life. Sustain life in all sorts of ways, everyday life and salaries and the means to live, but also just looking at other things that we could be using our skills and creativity to create and to build and to make. So
absolutely,
I think these are the sorts of questions that I think are vital for us in the future.
Well, we will just say that in the run-up to the election, we have an open call to Jackie Baillie and the other candidates in Dumbarton if they'd like to come and have a wee hustings on Broadcasting Scotland on this issue. Absolutely. We would love to have them.
More than happy to do that.
So we move on a wee bit now, though. And speaking of the kind of Scotland that we would like to be, we have heard news this week that Brussels is looking into ways for Scotland to remain in the Erasmus scheme. This, of course, is the educational exchange scheme between universities and other institutions around Europe. Britain, of course, has withdrawn from it now as part of the Brexit agreement, despite offers for it to be continued. So, Lesley, if I could come to you quickly on this. What do you think of this attempt for Scotland to remain in the Erasmus scheme, or rather to return to the Erasmus scheme, even though the UK has set its face against it?
Well, I'm all for it, Kenny. I've worked in higher education in the university sector. I know many people who've benefited personally from being part of the Erasmus scheme. I know that it extends beyond just individual students having the opportunity to spend time at European universities. It's also there for groups from schools and from other education environments. And there's nothing bad to say about Erasmus. It's all good. It's such a positive way of building, of extending people's horizons, giving them a chance to explore and discover different cultures, different languages, all of which are great things. And actually, I think one of the interesting things to me about this current discussion about Erasmus is the level of support that is coming for trying to find a way for Scotland and Wales to participate in it from within the European Parliament. There's the MEPs from across the political spectrum and from all over Europe are really backing Scotland, backing the proposal. I can't remember, but I think it's a German MEP who herself spent a year as an Erasmus student here in Edinburgh. And I think this is just an indication of the way in which Brexit has kind of shifted wider European perspective and understanding of Scotland's constitutional position, and why there's the increasing demand for an independent Scotland, because we want and we seek ways to build these relationships and these links and these friendships across Europe, and to learn from one another. And Erasmus is a great way to do that. So I'm all in favour of it, and I really hope that this attempt to find a way to include Scotland and Wales in the scheme will be successful.
And Toni, as we said, the UK was offered chances to stay in the Erasmus scheme, but they chose not to. Similarly with visas for musicians and so on, there was an option there that the EU was offering, and the UK said absolutely not. What do you think is going on with that kind of refusal to participate in European life?
Well, that's a good way of framing it, because I think that's exactly what it is. They have robbed young people of the opportunities that we've all had. And I benefited from Erasmus. Erasmus changed my life. It really did, and I make no exaggeration. I was a very unhappy 20-year-old when I went to Brussels for my Erasmus year, and those 12 months helped me understand who I was, accept who I was, and I came back a completely different person. So, leaving aside the educational, benefits of Erasmus, the personal development. As you know, I work in mental health. Those years are fundamental for young people's own development. And it was huge for me, and it was I know that it's played a huge part in people's lives, and many other people that I know, and so I think we shouldn't lose sight of that, what it does for people, the doors that it opens, and again, the whole point about interacting with European culture, languages. The UK is already the most monolingual country in Europe, and probably one of the most monolingual in the world, I would say. We don't speak other languages, and already, if you look at our standard grades, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of young people studying other languages, this was an opportunity, and to boost that. And I think that there are very promising signs that we might be able to continue with Erasmus. And I think if we do, we really need to do more to make languages more attractive, because it's not just about learning the language per se, it's the cultural barriers, it's the understanding of others. And actually, through understanding others, you're more likely to understand more about yourself. Going back to one of the famous Burns quotes, it's that time of year. So I think it's important to keep those links alive, and that we do everything we can to remain in Erasmus, to give our young people the opportunities that we had. And to those who say, oh, but it's only for middle class kids or that kind of thing, frankly, if Erasmus didn't exist, young people from the poorest households would never be able to go to Europe for a year abroad. They wouldn't be able to afford it. So, we're robbing these young people from some of the poorest households as well, from some of the poorest communities, the opportunity to do something that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. And I think that's frankly disgraceful. There is an agenda, of course, there's a British agenda to divide us from the continent. It won't prevail. It won't work, because our young people didn't vote for Brexit, and our young people voted also for independence. They want to be global citizens, and that's a good thing.
Well, Toni, you have segued beautifully into our final topic, because we have just seen the 20th poll in a row showing a majority for independence. This was a poll by Panelbase. She gave a result of 52% yes, 48% no. We've also seen the SNP talking about independence strategy. They have their National Assembly today, which is discussing routes towards independence. And they've just appointed Marco Biaggi as a new leader of a task force within the party to move the movement forward. So, Toni, I'll come to you just quickly. What do you make of these moves that the party is making towards an actual strategy for achieving independence?
Well, Kenny, I think the strategy makes a lot of sense to me. The focus right now is to win the Holyrood election. So that's what I'm focused on, is winning and gaining Dumbarton. A constituency that we've never won before, and a constituency that wants change. The people of Dumbarton voted for independence in 2014. They voted Remain in 2016, and yet they have an MSP who would rather have the Tories in Westminster than an independent Scottish Parliament that can end poverty. She would rather have a Tory government in Westminster harming the communities that she represents, some of the poorest communities in Scotland, than the chance to build a fairer Scotland with the powers of an independent country. That's the choice. So my focus and the party's focus for the next few months must be on winning this election. So let's do things in sequence, and let's do things properly. Because there's a lot of discussions about strategy and all the rest of it, and there are some people who are already acting like we've won the election. We've not. A week is a long time in politics. 3.5 months is even more. So let's focus on winning these elections. Let's not be complacent about winning these elections, and let's win seats that we've never won before. The electoral national swing. I think you talked about Marco Biaggi. Marco actually did a very good thread about a week ago, I think, on the fact that some constituencies are like mini battlegrounds across the country, right? And the national swing doesn't, in previous elections, hasn't applied everywhere. There are constituencies, for whatever reason, their history, their incumbency factors, local issues, that haven't fallen to the SNP. They didn't fall to the SNP in 2011 during our majority landslide. So we need to be aware that there are some key constituencies that haven't been won in the past that need to be won this time. And that's what my focus is on. And if you don't mind, I've got a wee plug, for my crowdfund, which will kick off next week. And I'll be inviting, independent supporters from across Scotland, if they want to help to unseat Jackie Baillie, if they want to help to win Dumbarton for the first time for the SNP and secure an independence majority, then let's do everything we can to win those key seats that will be absolutely crucial. And that's what I'm focused on. But otherwise, I think the strategy is absolutely clear. We win the majority, and we ask for a Section 30 order. If it is refused, then it will be up to the UK government, Boris Johnson and the Tories, to challenge that in the courts. And actually, at that point, they won't be challenging, and this is a political point, they won't be challenging the SNP, they'll be challenging the people of Scotland. Because if they're saying that the people of Scotland cannot have a referendum based on their expressed wish and a mandate that they have voted for, if we win that election, then that's a collision course between the UK government and the people of Scotland. Not the SNP, not the Scottish government, but the Scottish people. I don't think that's a tenable, a viable position for the UK government. And I don't think it's a viable position for the UK government internationally. So I think that the strategy is clear, it is sound, but my appeal would be for the next few months, let's focus on the prize, on winning this election, winning key target seats, and winning a majority. And absolutely, I'm always up for having a chat and a discussion about strategy. But there are moments where you have to unite, and there are moments when you have to get behind your leader, particularly when your leader is doing really, really well. In the polls and doing a good job handling the pandemic. So let's get behind our leader. And obviously, I'm talking about, this is a message for SNP voters and supporters, and let's focus on winning these elections and winning them well.
Well, let me come to Lesley now, because Lesley, one of the big differences that we've seen since 2014 has been the rise in support for independence amongst women. Something that Women for Independence has been fighting very hard for a long time now. What do you think is driving that, and what difference do you think that makes to the way that the movement works?
Well, I think the style, the tone, and some of the achievements of this present government and Nicola Sturgeon's leadership, I think there's no question that has made an impact. That her, there's something about the tone and the approach of Nicola Sturgeon, which is more approachable, more amenable to women. I think, one of the things about women is that they need to take their time. They like to take their time. They like to get the information. They like to have a sense of, they're making decisions or choices based on what is going to be good for themselves, for their families, for the well-being of their communities. You can't just, take it as read or come up with, sort of big kind of rhetoric. You really need to take seriously the issues that matter to women, the fundamental issues. And I think there have been signs that has been the case over these recent years, certainly since Brexit. And I think Sturgeon's handling of the pandemic has also certainly been in our favour. That's not to say that critical friends shouldn't be aware and scrutinising and challenging policies where they maybe don't go as far as we would like. But I do think these are some of the factors that have been involved in shifting away from an old macho style of politics, which all Scottish parties have been guilty of, the SNP included. I think within Women for Independence, our approach has always been to engage in the kind of respectful dialogue and conversation that Toni was speaking about a wee while ago, to take seriously people's concerns and their questions, and to encourage women that politics in Scotland is not just a business for governments or for politicians. It's something that we all do in our own communities because we care about our communities. And we want to be able to see and to imagine that we have some kind of say in the way things happen in our communities to make them better, to build a more just and a more equal Scotland. And these are some of the things that do matter to women. Mm-hmm. Sadly, of course, on the flip side of that, on the downside, is that we're all about encouraging women into public and political life and supporting them to do so. But when you've got a political culture, which still is very widespread in Scotland, that is dismissive or that takes a very kind of different approach, and in particular that has become increasingly hostile and abusive in attacking women, in diminishing them, in really being just the worst kind of vitriol that we all know about. These are things that are concerns for the future. And I think these are issues that Toni was kind of hinting at there, and that we really need to take very seriously if we want to build on that sense that women now have. It's about creating a kind of, not just saying, why the current constitutional arrangement in our the UK government and all that happens in Westminster is very clearly not good for women, not good for children, not good for carers, not good for people living in poverty, but that we actually have an alternative vision and an alternative path and a way in which we can all participate in creating that kind of Scotland. I don't think, personally, independence, what's the point in independence if nothing changes, for people in their own lives? And I think that's what we need to keep. Absolutely. Our messaging always needs to be, we can make a difference, we can build a better Scotland, we can change the way in which we live our lives and support our communities to make it juster, fairer and safer. And I think all of those things are what encourage women to increasingly support independence.
Well, we have actually gone slightly over time today, but honestly, I didn't want to interrupt anybody at any point. All of these topics that we've discussed today, I feel could have taken up the whole hour if we'd wanted them to. But thank you so much to Lesley Orr and to Toni Guigliano for their contributions today. It's been a real pleasure having both of you on the show. And thank you to you at home for joining us as well. There would be no point in us making these shows at all if not for you. So thank you very much for spending an hour with us today. If you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland, then please go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and it's your contributions that help us keep Broadcasting Scotland on the air. As many of you know, we're also running a crowdfunder just now, so if you'd like to contribute to that to help us employ some staff going into the election and potentially an independence campaign sometime very soon, then please go to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate and you can make a one-off donation there. If you're not able to support us financially, you can still support us in other ways. You can follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot. You can like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, make us one of your favourites on the Amazon Fire Stick, and then share the shows around with your friends and family. Let them know why you support Broadcasting Scotland, and hopefully you can encourage them to give us a watch as well. And finally, if you'd like to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, there are lots of opportunities for volunteers as well as for that staff that we're trying to employ. So wherever you are in Scotland, there are things that you can do to help if you'd like to. So if you're interested at all in helping us build a better broadcaster for Scotland, do please get in touch with us. But that is absolutely all we have time for today. So once again, thank you very much to Lesley and to Toni. Gordon will be back again at 7 tomorrow night with Scotland at 7. I'll be back in a couple of weeks. I'm taking a wee break just now. But until then, thank you once again to Toni and to Lesley. Thank you to you at home for joining us, and have a great day. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
The Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%,